August 2019. A heavy atmosphere enveloped the partially abandoned East Boston construction site. Just a few minutes' drive from the Chelsea warehouse district, flashlight beams from the construction oversight team cut through layers of accumulated dust and rusted steel, built up over many years, illuminating something no one was supposed to find. Center, we need police and forensics here immediately. Serious discovery under the warehouse foundation. The worker's voice echoed off the cold metal walls. What began as a routine demolition after an excavator hit an obstruction had now become something entirely different. Something that would answer the haunting questions that had plagued Somerville and Chelsea for 15 years. An industrial freezer buried deep under the concrete foundation, and inside it were the remains of a person who had vanished. That person was Thomas Avery, the man who left home one August morning in 2004 and never returned. For nearly 2 decades, Thomas Avery's disappearance was nothing but unanswered questions. A disciplined businessman with fixed habits, suddenly vanishing without leaving any message. A car abandoned at Logan parking lot, an unfinished work schedule, an empty chair at every family meal. A room his loved ones never had the courage to close the door on. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring forgotten cases back into the light, and the algorithm will make sure you don't miss any future stories. The discovery of the freezer in East Boston was not just the end of a missing person case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that would expose secrets buried for years in the working-class communities north of Boston. Because when authorities finally identified a suspect and made an arrest in 2019, it wasn't a drifter or an anonymous criminal. It was someone the community knew. Someone they had worked with, someone they trusted, someone who had lived among them for 15 years, carrying this horrific secret. The Avery case was not just a mystery solved, it was proof of a family's unrelenting persistence, investigators who refused to let the file gather dust, and advances in forensic science that gave a voice back to a victim silenced by time. It is also the story of a community torn apart. When Thomas Avery vanished in 2004, suspicion spread through Somerville and Chelsea like smoldering fire. Co-workers eyed each other warily. Rumors crept into every night shift at the warehouse. The search for Thomas Avery exposed the hidden cracks beneath the surface of a seemingly tight-knit community. Those cracks would burst open when the truth was finally revealed after 15 years. What makes this case particularly haunting is that the answer was always so close. The prime suspect had been interviewed in the initial investigation, but slipped through the cracks. For years, this person appeared at memorials, looked straight into the eyes of those waiting for Thomas to return, and maintained a calm demeanor while hiding an unimaginable truth. Where are you watching from today? Leave your location in the comments below. I'm always curious to know how far stories like this travel and how they connect us across distances. Tonight, we'll go back to the events of August 2004, trace the search that stretched over more than a decade, and uncover the stunning breakthrough that brought closure to one of Massachusetts' coldest missing persons cases. This is a story of loss, persistence, deception, and finally justice delayed, but not denied. Boston in late summer 2004 carried the intersection of heavy industrial air in Chelsea, the dense residential rhythm of Somerville, and the constant movement around the Logan Airport area. In that context, Thomas Avery, 55 years old, owner of a mid-sized logistics company in Chelsea, was a man with a regular routine, known for his meticulousness and always starting his workday very early to inspect the warehouse before employees arrived. For many years, his daily routine barely changed, leaving his home in Somerville at dawn, driving through McGrath Highway, arriving in Chelsea around 4 a.m., checking the shipping logs and verifying the day's shipments. On August 16 and 17, 2004, his work schedule and communications showed no abnormalities, except that he finished work later than usual on the evening of August 16 and received several calls regarding cargo contracts that he had not yet responded to. By August 17, his co-workers noted that he did not appear at the warehouse in the morning, which was completely out of character after many years. Thomas also did not attend the 9 a.m. internal meeting, despite it being an important item he always personally chaired. In the 24 hours before his disappearance, his routine had only one clearly confirmed point. Around 3:45 a.m., on August 17th, neighbors heard his car leaving the driveway, but no one actually saw who was in the vehicle. By the afternoon of the same day, all attempts to contact him from coworkers and his assistant yielded no results. Thomas's phone switched to inactive status, and he did not appear at home, according to a routine that had almost never changed. 3 simultaneous unusual signs: no show at the warehouse in the morning, complete loss of contact for many hours, and his personal vehicle not recorded at any familiar location, made Helen Duarte, his longtime assistant, realize that the situation went far beyond a simple delay or sudden schedule change. After waiting several more hours with no response or sign that Thomas was still actively moving, at 6:20 p.m. on August 17, 2004, Helen made the official decision to contact the Somerville Police Department to report Thomas Avery missing. The Somerville Police Department received the missing person report late that afternoon and immediately initiated the initial recording procedure according to protocol for an adult missing under unknown circumstances. The information was entered into the system by the duty officer before proceeding to collect background data on the victim, including physical description, age, height, weight, hair color, identifying marks, as well as the last known clothing and personal vehicle typically used. Helen Duarte provided these descriptions with high accuracy based on many years of working directly with Thomas, while also confirming details about the vehicle model, license plate, and personal items he almost always carried when leaving home. After the background information collection step, police established the relevant timelines, with the last verified point being 3:45 a.m. When neighbors recorded the sound of Thomas's car leaving the driveway, although there was no direct witness seeing him driving, this was the only time point the investigation could use as a foundation for establishing the range of movement and initial risk assessment. The prolonged loss of contact from morning to afternoon, combined with the victim's failure to appear at work as per usual routine, quickly led to the case being classified as an unusual disappearance, distinct from voluntary departures or sudden lifestyle changes. Based on the initial verified data, the duty officer continued to assess the risk level according to internal criteria. Thomas had no history of going missing, showed no signs of preparing for a long-term departure, had no clear personal or professional reason to deliberately cut contact, and the time of disappearance fell in the pre-dawn window, a period typically ranked as high risk in adult missing persons files. The simultaneous appearance of these factors quickly ruled out the possibility that this was merely a routine interruption, leading to the decision to elevate the priority level immediately that day. The file Missing Person 08-1704 Avery was created and activated on the afternoon of August 17, 2004, marking the moment the case officially moved from initial recording to urgent missing person investigation status. Shortly thereafter, the preliminary report, along with all background information on Thomas Avery, was forwarded to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Somerville Police Department, with a request to implement the next procedural steps according to standard sequence, starting with checking the residence, assessing signs of voluntary departure, and narrowing the possible range of movement based on the last verified time point. When Thomas Avery's missing person file was handed over to the initial investigative team, Somerville Police prioritized checking the residence as the first approach to determine the context before his disappearance. The house in Somerville, where Thomas lived with his wife Lydia Avery, became the first survey point. The investigative team approached the home in the early evening of August 17th, conducting a general sweep to assess the state of the living space, the distribution of personal items, and the possibility of signs indicating Thomas had planned a long trip or extended absence. From the initial observation, there were no signs that he had packed luggage, prepared spare clothing, or carried out any proactive packing activity for departure. Personal items such as a backup wallet, work notebook, administrative documents, briefcase, and several spare keys remained in their usual places, clearly showing a stable repeated habit without signs of interruption. The closet, home office, and common living areas showed no unusual missing items, reinforcing the assessment that Thomas had not left home in a mindset of additional preparation. At the same time, the team evaluated the credibility of Lydia's initial statement, who said she had gone to bed early and only knew Thomas left the house sometime before dawn, as per his usual routine. Although the statement was presented coherently, the investigators noted the need for further evaluation of consistency in reports regarding timing, routine, and the possibility that Thomas had left without notifying Lydia, especially given the lack of a direct witness seeing him get into the car at the alleged departure time. From the scene data, police continued to review items that could reflect the level of preparation for a trip. His personal phone was not in the house, indicating he took it with him. However, other important items, such as a second wristwatch, reading glasses, or work documents he usually took on longer trips, remained fully present. This helped reinforce the hypothesis that the act of leaving was not part of a long-term plan. After the overall assessment, the investigative team began establishing a reasonable range of movement based on the victim's vehicle, daily travel habits, and the most recent recorded departure time. With Thomas's personal vehicle not yet located at the time of the home check, police had to assume he had traveled along the basic route from Somerville toward Chelsea via McGrath Highway or other connecting routes leading to the company warehouse area. The initial priority search areas included the victim's regular travel routes, the route from home to the warehouse, traffic intersections where traffic cameras or private cameras might have captured the vehicle, and the vicinity of the Chelsea warehouse, where Thomas was present almost daily. In addition, police also considered the possibility he turned in the opposite direction toward Cambridge or Medford, though this was not his usual direction, but still within a reasonable range if he had an unusual change in plans that morning. By synthesizing the scene assessment, review of personal items, and identification of potential travel directions, the investigative team completed the initial phase of establishing the search perimeter, laying the groundwork for broader search deployment based on the most realistic assumptions about the victim's behavior and trajectory in the final hours before losing contact. Immediately after completing the residence check and establishing the victim's likely range of movement, Somerville police launched the initial search phase in the area surrounding Thomas Avery's home, expanding the sweep according to the radius established from previously collected data. The focus of this phase was gathering field information from the residential community, businesses, transportation facilities, and any independent observation sources that could help determine Thomas's initial direction of travel right after his presumed departure around 4 a.m. The investigative team divided the Somerville area into small grid sections based on routes connecting to McGrath Highway, Route 28, and secondary branches heading toward Chelsea to ensure no possibility was missed that the victim's vehicle had followed a route not fully matching his daily habit. Work teams went street by street along main segments such as Walnut Street, Pearl Street, Medford Street, and Somerville Avenue to record whether anyone had seen Thomas's car leaving the area early that morning, even though it was an hour with little traffic. Police approached families living along the segments connecting to the turn onto McGrath Highway, hoping to find an incidental witness who heard or saw the car pass. However, most residents said they were asleep at pre-dawn and observed nothing noteworthy. In addition to gathering information from residents, police also worked with early opening businesses near the Somerville area, including some small coffee shops and convenience stores open from 5 a.m. Staff at these establishments were asked about the possibility of noticing Thomas's car or any individual matching the victim's description, but none provided verifiable information. In parallel with community outreach, police reviewed Somerville's traffic systems and nearby areas to check functioning traffic cameras, though in 2004, the number of public and private cameras was still very limited. Cameras at some major intersections were manually checked, but image quality was poor, and the time frame in question fell during low light conditions, making vehicle observation or identification nearly impossible. Police also sought contact with gas stations, vending points, and 24-hour facilities, but the data obtained mostly did not match the time or record any activity related to the victim. After completing the review of routes out of Somerville, the team expanded the scope further to Cambridge and Medford, since these areas could lie on alternative routes if Thomas changed direction for personal reasons or due to an unidentified special situation. Police approached early bus stops, Red Line train stations, and public transit points, while also asking early shift workers to verify if they had seen any man matching Thomas's description that morning. However, no one confirmed seeing the victim. During the expanded sweep, police also checked road segments that might have had traffic incidents or hazardous points, such as construction zones, poorly lit turns, or roads near fill areas. They searched for signs of sudden braking, skid marks, or any recent physical evidence that could relate to a vehicle moving at night or early morning. However, no directional leads were found. The investigative team continued contacting small transport facilities and 24/7 businesses in Chelsea, but still obtained no statements indicating an independent sighting of Thomas during the suspected time frame. Early delivery drivers operating around Somerville, Medford were also questioned, as they were among the few likely to be on the road around 4 a.m. Nevertheless, no one reported encountering the victim's vehicle. The absence of independent witnesses and the silence of the surrounding environment at pre-dawn made the initial search process difficult, forcing the investigative team to accept that Thomas's route after leaving home could not be verified by direct observation. Nevertheless, the work team still recorded all checked points, remarking areas with suitable characteristics for deeper search in subsequent phases. The results of the initial search provided a clearer picture: no signs that Thomas appeared on familiar routes, no independent witnesses saw him after departure, and no evidence that he had contact with local residents or businesses that morning. All these factors confirmed that the search perimeter needed to be expanded beyond the Somerville area toward more critical points on his potential travel route. When the sweep of the Somerville neighborhood area did not yield clear results regarding Thomas Avery's travel route, a significant development occurred the following morning. When the Logan Airport Parking Management Department notified the Somerville police that a personal vehicle had been parked overnight beyond the usual recorded time limit and showed no signs of the owner returning. This information was immediately forwarded to the investigative team because it matched the description of the vehicle Thomas typically used to commute, and subsequent details quickly confirmed that this was indeed the victim's vehicle. The car was discovered in the Terminal B garage parking area, a multi-level facility commonly used by passengers for short business trips. The investigative team proceeded to the scene to examine the vehicle's condition and cross-check the initial information. In the parking lot, Thomas's car was found in a spot not far from the entrance, located right in one of the areas designated for passengers departing the state on early morning flights. The vehicle was locked, with no signs of collision or forced entry. The windows were not rolled down, and there were no indications of anyone attempting unauthorized access. This suggested the car had been parked deliberately, not abandoned suddenly due to mechanical failure or an unexpected emergency. Data from the parking garage's card swipe system provided a crucial timestamp. The vehicle was recorded entering the garage at 5:22 a.m. on August 17th, less than 2 hours after neighbors heard the car leaving the driveway. Establishing the precise time the car entered the parking area gave the investigative team a stronger basis to narrow the window of the victim's movement and determine the actual route likely chosen. This was the first verified timestamp after leaving home, backed by device data, and far more significant than information based on speculation or witnesses hearing sounds. Based on the parking location and surrounding areas of the garage, police considered the possibility that Thomas had planned to leave the state by air. However, the review found no evidence that he had taken any necessary steps for a flight. No pre-booked airline tickets, no electronic check-in, and no proof that he had approached airport security checkpoints after parking. Additionally, there was no luggage in the car, no personal items for extended travel, and no work documents or equipment related to scheduled meetings or trips. These factors ruled out the possibility that Thomas had intentionally left the state by air, while raising larger questions about why his personal vehicle had ended up there. The fact that Thomas's car was parked at the airport carried significant implications for the direction of the investigation. First, it indicated that if Thomas himself had driven to Logan, this behavior was inconsistent with his usual routine, which did not include unscheduled short business trips. Second, if the vehicle had been brought to the airport by someone else, it could have been a deliberate act to mislead authorities, making the disappearance appear to be a voluntary departure from the city. Third, the fact that the car was neatly parked, carefully locked, and showed no signs of being rummaged through, suggested that whoever drove it there had the time and composure to carry out these actions, ruling out abandonment due to panic or immediate danger at that moment. Furthermore, the parking location offered other clues. The area was near the central elevators, convenient for quickly moving into the terminal or exiting the area via other means, not under airport control. This led the investigative team to hypothesize that if Thomas had not come there himself, the driver had relied on the area's convenience to park as part of an intent to conceal the true route. After completing the on-site inspection around the vehicle, police requested that Logan Airport Management extract data from the surveillance system, including the list of cameras covering the parking area and entry-exit logs, recording activity in the garage during the relevant time frame. The review showed that the system had only recorded the vehicle's entry into the lot. There was no data confirming that the car had ever left the garage afterward. The absence of a corresponding exit record indicated that the person who brought the car there had left the area by another means or departed without returning to the vehicle and had not generated any transactions or actions that would leave traces in the parking management system. This finding made the theory that Thomas had actively used the car to leave the airport far less convincing, while raising questions about the true purpose of bringing the vehicle to Logan. In light of this situation, the investigative direction had to be immediately expanded toward Chelsea, the area Thomas Avery frequently traveled to each morning, and the location of the warehouse and operational office of Avery Logistics. Given the victim's habits and familiar route, Chelsea was the most logical destination in the time frame before the car appeared at the airport, and it was also the area most likely to contain anomalies that initial checks in Somerville had not been able to access or fully verify. During this expanded search phase, police focused on two main directions: a comprehensive inspection of the warehouse area and a sweep of industrial transport routes related to the company's operations, while surveying vacant lots, areas adjacent to the waterfront, and low-traffic spots during the pre-dawn hours, factors that could facilitate an incident or ambush without detection. At the Avery Logistics warehouse, located on the edge of the Chelsea Industrial District, police conducted a systematic scene examination, starting from the entrance area, loading yard and shipping zone, then expanding to the container staging lot and truck access roads. Due to the nature of logistics operations, the area saw heavy vehicle movement at night or early morning, creating an environment conducive to masking sounds or activities during low traffic periods. However, during the sweep, police found no clear physical evidence such as skid marks, drag marks, or fresh tire impressions. Older tire tracks and routine truck activity made identifying anomalies more difficult. In addition, the investigative team spent time examining bordering areas, including vacant lots near the industrial rail line, disused older warehouses, and unfinished construction sites in eastern Chelsea, where the road surface was uneven and lighting was inconsistent. These locations were considered suitable spots for an incident or criminal act to occur without drawing attention. Nevertheless, despite a thorough search of the sites, from ground level to wall recesses and areas behind containers, no evidence directly related to Thomas was discovered. Another search effort was deployed along the waterfront edges near Chelsea Creek, where many water and road transport routes intersect. This area featured complex terrain with embankments, docks, small piers, and shallow water sections, making it a potential spot for discarding items or an accident if the victim had been diverted. K-9 units were deployed along the embankments to detect the victim's scent or personal items, but the results yielded no positive signals. To assess the possibility of unusual activity in the warehouse area around the time of the disappearance, the investigative team continued working with employees, drivers, and temporary workers who had been present in the Chelsea area during the night of August 16th and early morning of August 17th. Collected statements primarily revolved around routine cargo loading-unloading activities, with no one reporting anything unusual in the area. Some delivery drivers noted passing through the Chelsea Industrial District between 4 and 6 a.m., but none recalled seeing Thomas's personal vehicle or any matching description. Police also reviewed entry/exit logs from nearby warehouses to check for unidentified vehicles operating at the corresponding time, but most facilities only recorded large commercial trucks and did not log personal vehicles at such early hours. In addition to human and business sources, the investigative team noted the lack of surveillance cameras in the industrial area in 2004, which made reconstructing the victim's route or identifying suspicious activity nearly impossible. The absence of image data in Chelsea significantly limited the ability to determine whether Thomas had passed through the area after leaving home, while making it difficult to substantiate the hypothesis that he had been intercepted or encountered an incident en route to the warehouse. However, based on the terrain characteristics and sparse vehicle density in the pre-dawn hours, when virtually no outsiders were present, the investigative team concluded that if an unusual situation involving Thomas had occurred, it was entirely plausible for it to have taken place in this area without leaving clear traces. Although the expanded search did not uncover physical evidence or direct indicators tied to the victim, the sweeps in Chelsea and the surrounding industrial area helped more clearly narrow the actual space where an incident was considered most likely, while reaffirming that Thomas's movements after leaving home left no verifiable signs at the key points police had hoped for. This factor compelled the investigative team to revisit and more deeply evaluate other possibilities related to the route, circumstances, and personal factors that may have contributed to his disappearance. In the context of the searches in Chelsea and the surrounding industrial area, yielding no direct leads on Thomas Avery's whereabouts, the investigative team shifted focus to a comprehensive review of all background data related to his work, communication, and travel schedule in the final week before the disappearance, in order to identify any fluctuations, pressures, or unusual changes that could serve as critical leads. This compilation included checking the work schedule stored in Avery Logistics' internal system, appointments and partners Thomas had contacted, shipping invoices from the days leading up to the event, and the complete call logs of outgoing and incoming calls he made or received. Initial documents showed that Thomas had maintained a stable schedule, primarily focused on two areas: overseeing warehouse operations and handling transport-related negotiations. In the week before disappearing, he attended 3 supply contract meetings and 2 unscheduled inventory checks at the warehouse, but there were no signs of internal conflict or direct disputes with employees or partners. Regarding personal communications, Thomas's mobile phone showed average activity levels, consisting mainly of calls from family, his assistant, and familiar business contacts. There were no repeated calls from unknown numbers or anything warranting special attention. However, 2 calls on the evening of August 16th from an out-of-state transport partner were considered noteworthy, as the discussion concerned delays in processing an important shipment. Nevertheless, the partner company confirmed that the disagreement did not exceed normal tension levels and showed no signs of threats. Regarding the victim's travel route in the final week, information provided by Helen Duarte aligned with his long-standing habits. Thomas arrived at the warehouse very early in the morning, left in the early afternoon, and spent the rest of the day handling paperwork at the office or returning home. There were no unscheduled trips outside the Boston, Chelsea, Somerville area. This led the investigative team to focus even more on the likelihood that the disappearance did not stem from a voluntary departure plan as there were no indications that Thomas had prepared for a major schedule change, booked out-of-state appointments, or exhibited typical behaviors of someone intending to detach from their environment, such as unusual cash withdrawals, sudden cancellations, or asset transfers. Additionally, when assessing risk factors in the final week, the investigative team noted 2 points of concern. First, Thomas finishing work later than usual on the evening of August 16th and having a few unresolved late-night calls suggested he may have been under higher than normal work pressure. Second, information from warehouse employees indicated a shipment delayed for unclear reasons, prompting Thomas to personally inspect it instead of delegating to lower-level management. Although these 2 factors were not directly linked to violent behavior or immediate safety risks, they were still regarded as variables that could have influenced the victim's activities in the period immediately before the disappearance. To evaluate the possibility of voluntary departure, the investigative team applied standard criteria used in adult missing persons cases, including examining signs of severe personal stress, long-term preparation, or evidence of intent to evade family or financial obligations. However, all data from bank accounts, credit activity, and personal communications showed that Thomas's life had remained stable in the final week, with no sudden withdrawals, no unusual transactions, and no letters or notes suggesting a departure plan. Furthermore, those who interacted with him in the final week described Thomas as normal, showing no significant signs of depression or emotional change. This nearly completely ruled out the hypothesis of a long-term voluntary departure. Conversely, the investigative team assessed the possibility of the victim encountering an incident or coercive act based on data related to movement and work. Factors, such as leaving home unusually early, traveling through sparsely populated industrial areas, and the recent delayed shipment over the prior 2 days were included among variables to monitor. While the risk level was not yet sufficient to point to a specific criminal act, these elements suggested that if Thomas had encountered an unexpected incident, it was most likely to have occurred in a work-related context or along the route to his workplace. After compiling all the data, the investigative team proceeded to construct a pre-missing timeline, a detailed chronological framework covering the 72 hours before Thomas disappeared up to the last recorded point. This pre-missing timeline included verified daily work activities, cross-referenced contact points from phone records, and travel routes during the week. This timeline became a critical foundation for identifying unexplained gaps, unverified activities lacking independent sources, and time points with potential for incidents to have occurred. Establishing this complete temporal structure was regarded as an essential preparatory step, enabling the investigative team to move into detailed evaluation of the unclear intervals and determine which of these intersection points represented the highest risk areas, requiring prioritized on-site checks in subsequent steps. Based on the established pre-missing timeline structure, the investigative team entered the phase of in-depth analysis of the events of the night of August 16th and early morning of August 17th, which was the pivotal period immediately before Thomas Avery was recorded leaving home. This process began with cross-referencing timelines provided by directly related individuals, including statements from Lydia Avery, assistant Helen Duarte, and warehouse employees who worked the evening shift on August 16th. The goal was to determine the degree of consistency between the time points they reported and activities verifiable through documents, records, or independent witnesses. According to Lydia's statement, the evening of August 16th unfolded relatively normally. The couple had dinner together. Thomas spent some time in his study handling paperwork, then went to bed earlier than usual. Lydia said she went to sleep around 10 p.m. and heard nothing unusual until near morning. However, this statement had to be compared with information from Helen Duarte, who confirmed that Thomas had called her at 9:48 p.m. to inquire about a problematic contract, and the call lasted about 10 minutes. This call was verified through phone records, meaning Thomas had been working later than Lydia recalled and could not have left his study at the time Lydia described. From this point, the first trace of inconsistency in statements emerged. Delving deeper into the pre-dawn period, Lydia stated she woke around 3:30 a.m. upon hearing a faint noise from the garage and believed it was Thomas preparing to leave for work as usual. However, she did not directly see him depart. This aligned with the neighbor's report of hearing the car leave the driveway around 3:45 a.m., but from the time Thomas left home to when his car was recorded entering the Logan parking garage at 5:22 a.m. was a nearly 2-hour gap, and the entire interval had no direct or indirect witnesses recording any of his activities. This represented the largest time gap in the entire case file and the area where the investigative team concentrated the most analytical effort, as it was the only segment of the timeline that could contain the actions leading to the victim's disappearance. When cross-referencing the warehouse employee's timeline, the investigative team noted another detail. A night shift worker reported seeing the lights on in the second-floor office of the warehouse until around 11:30 p.m. on August 16, though they were unsure if Thomas was the person inside. While not definitive confirmation, this information still indicated that Thomas's work may have ended later than expected, and the time he went to sleep might not match Lydia's account. This made the window between 10 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. a completely unverifiable time zone, further expanding the potential area for discrepancies. Additionally, the investigative team cross-checked phone data from the evening. After the call with Helen, there were no further communications from Thomas. This could fit his habit of cutting off contact before sleep, but it could also indicate that he had left the house during the period when Lydia believed he was still in his study. Since no location tracking devices were in use on Thomas's phone in 2004, this gap opened the possibility that he had left home earlier than Lydia described, without her realizing it. In the overall analysis of the timeline for the night of August 16th and early morning of August 17th, the investigative team identified 3 unverifiable time intervals using any independent source. First, from 10 p.m. to around 11:30 p.m., when no one could confirm Thomas's location at a time Lydia believed he was resting. But warehouse information showed the office lights still on. Second, from around 11:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., a period with no data or witnesses establishing Thomas's activities. Third, from 3:45 a.m. to 5:22 a.m., corresponding to the time the car left home and was recorded at Logan Airport. Among these 3 intervals, the third was deemed the investigative focus because it directly related to the vehicle's appearance at an unusual location. The second interval was also highly suspicious, as it covered most of the night after work activities ended, but lacked verification sources. From these murky time zones, the investigative team constructed several different possibilities regarding the circumstances of the disappearance. In the first possibility, Thomas may have left home earlier than Lydia recalled, and if so, he could have stopped at an intermediate point during the nearly 2-hour period before reaching Logan Airport. This possibility opened investigative directions related to unofficial stopping points where the victim could have encountered an incident or contact with others. In the second possibility, Thomas may have gone to Logan not to catch a flight, but to meet someone or conduct a work-related transaction or exchange. However, the lack of documents or luggage weakened this possibility. The third possibility involved the vehicle being driven by someone else, which would explain the long gap between leaving home and the car entering the parking garage, as well as the victim's absence from any airport cameras. Additionally, the investigative team considered the possibility that Thomas had encountered an incident shortly after leaving home in Somerville, before the vehicle was taken to Logan as a concealment act. However, the lack of traces along nearby routes made this hypothesis difficult to support. The analysis of time points and identification of unverifiable zones became a key tool for narrowing investigative directions, as from these time areas, the team identified not only high-risk points, but also the potential for the victim to have been approached or affected by external factors, thereby laying the groundwork for developing subsequent hypotheses to unravel the circumstances leading to Thomas Avery's disappearance. After completing the timeline analysis and identifying 3 unverifiable time periods related to the night of August 16th and the early morning of August 17th, the Somerville Police investigative team conducted a second round of interviews with individuals directly connected to Thomas Avery's schedule, daily routine, and work activities. The purpose was to cross-check initial statements against actual data collected from the warehouse inventory review, communication records, and vehicle timestamp data at Logan Airport. The objective of this enhanced interview phase was to assess the consistency of the statements, identify logically inexplicable discrepancies, and eliminate hypotheses that no longer held ground once a clearer picture of the victim's movements prior to disappearance emerged. The first interview in this round focused on Lydia Avery, as her statement directly concerned the time Thomas left the house, as well as his activities, on the night of August 16th. The team began by comparing her initial claim that Thomas had gone to bed early that evening with call log data from Thomas's phone, which confirmed he was still working and communicating with his assistant Helen Duarte until nearly 10 p.m. When questioned again about this time frame, Lydia explained that she was tired and might have misremembered when Thomas left his office. However, this adjustment did not fully align with the warehouse office lights remaining on past 11:30 p.m., according to information provided by warehouse staff. Lydia's inability to accurately describe when Thomas went to bed or the last time she saw him caused her statement to become increasingly inconsistent, especially when cross-referenced with independently verifiable events. The next point to probe was the period from 3:30 a.m. to 3:45 a.m., when Lydia reported hearing a noise and believed Thomas was preparing to leave the house. However, she did not directly see him, and no element confirmed that the noise definitely came from Thomas. The investigative team questioned whether she might have misheard sounds from the street or routine outdoor activity. Although Lydia maintained that the sound came from the garage, the lack of supporting evidence rendered this time frame unreliable and left it as a blurry point in the sequence of Thomas's departure. After concluding the enhanced interview with Lydia, the team moved on to Kevin Marsh, a close associate of Thomas and someone directly involved in transportation and warehouse operations throughout the final week. In his initial statement, Kevin asserted that he had not met Thomas in the 36 hours prior to the disappearance, but when cross-checked against inventory schedules and certain internal activities, this statement did not fully match. A night shift employee reported seeing Kevin near the second-floor office around the end of the workday on August 16th, and although this information was not conclusive enough to prove they met, it was sufficient to undermine the accuracy of Kevin's statement. When questioned again about this period, Kevin responded vaguely, saying he might have passed through that area to check inventory, but he could not recall clearly and insisted he did not speak with Thomas. This vagueness and lack of specificity were noted by the team as a potential contradiction. The team continued to cross-check Kevin's statements regarding activities related to the delayed shipment that Thomas had to personally inspect on August 16th. Kevin claimed he was not involved in handling that shipment and knew few details. However, internal records showed he had responsibility for coordinating part of the transportation process. When asked why internal data reflected a more significant role than what he described, Kevin could not provide a reasonable explanation, only stating that those records had not been accurately updated. These points led to his statement being evaluated as unreliable. During the enhanced interview phase, the team also revisited statements from several warehouse employees to determine whether any unusual signs occurred on the night of August 16th or early morning of August 17th that might relate to Thomas's disappearance. Most employees confirmed no unusual incidents, no strangers appearing, and no non-company vehicles remaining in the area. These statements helped rule out the possibility of a major violent incident at the warehouse during Thomas's final work hours, although an incident during transit could not be excluded. When compiling the full results of the second round of interviews, the investigative team determined that several possibilities no longer had sufficient basis to pursue. The hypothesis that Thomas left voluntarily for personal reasons was eliminated due to no evidence supporting such intent. The possibility of internal conflict with employees or partners leading to an incident was downgraded in priority because the data showed no sufficiently strong disputes. Additionally, the hypothesis of a traffic accident en route to the warehouse became difficult to sustain, as no physical evidence or accident reports matched the suspected time and location. What remained after eliminating unsupported directions was a hazy time frame extending from when Thomas may have left home until his vehicle appeared at Logan. This became the sole focus of the investigation at the conclusion of the enhanced interview phase, and narrowing down unsuitable possibilities allowed the team to concentrate all efforts on explaining this gap using reasonable factors consistent with verified data. Based on the results of the enhanced interviews and the time discrepancies identified in the timeline analysis, the investigative team proceeded with a second search operation, focusing on narrowing the geographic scope according to the unverifiable time periods and potentially decisive travel routes during the phase from when Thomas Avery was believed to have left home until his vehicle appeared in the Logan Airport parking lot. The goal of this search was no longer a comprehensive sweep of residential areas as before, but rather targeted points along likely routes the victim may have traveled, including segments connecting Somerville to Chelsea, industrial border areas, vacant lots, and locations where terrain or concealment factors made discarding evidence feasible. The initial focus was placed on McGrath Highway and its side branches leading to the Chelsea industrial area, as this was the most logical route if Thomas truly left home between 3:45 a.m. and 4 a.m. The team searched this area section by section, from straight, easily observable stretches to blind spots near underpasses, wide shoulders, or poorly lit turns. The objective was to find mechanical signs such as fresh tire tracks, skid marks, brake impressions, vehicle debris, or any physical evidence reflecting Thomas's or his vehicle's presence during the critical period. However, most points showed no necessary traces to support any assumption. Strong winds, heavy ongoing traffic, and changing road conditions due to weather had nearly erased any small or temporary traces that might have existed. After completing the review of main routes, the team shifted to inspecting industrial areas bordering Chelsea, as the secluded nature of these locations had always been considered potential sites for concealment or evidence disposal. Abandoned warehouses, derelict factory buildings, inactive container yards, and low-light industrial premises were searched in depth, from exteriors to interior access paths, including drainage ditches, wall corners, scrap piles, and structures capable of blocking visibility. The team looked for signs of struggle, drag marks, chipped paint, discarded bindings, or victim belongings, but nothing yielded new information. Some questionable points were flagged for daytime re-inspection, but subsequent results did not improve the situation. In addition to industrial zones, police also searched vacant lots near industrial rail lines and lesser-used side roads, as these were positions that could be chosen for brief vehicle stops without drawing attention. These sites were checked for fresh soil depressions, unusual tire tracks, or signs of disturbed earth or grass. Some soft soil locations were noted but lacked sufficient basis to link them to the disappearance. Areas near bodies of water, particularly the Chelsea Creek running along the industrial zone, were also prioritized during this phase. The team conducted searches along embankments, access bridges, water approaches, and protruding land features that could serve as temporary stops or evidence disposal points. Key 9 units continued to be deployed, but the terrain's many overlapping industrial odors made distinguishing fresh from old scents more difficult, leading to inconclusive results. During the second search, police also considered the possibility that the victim was intercepted en route to the warehouse. However, the lack of independent witnesses, absence of traffic cameras, and no incident reports that night made this possibility difficult to substantiate. At the same time, Thomas's vehicle appearing at Logan Airport raised questions about whether any incident occurred before or after the car was brought to the lot, complicating evaluation of potential stops along the route. The investigative team gradually eliminated hypotheses that no longer fit. The road accident hypothesis was ruled out due to no physical evidence, no collision reports, and no unusual signs from rescue teams during the suspected time frame. The industrial area conflict hypothesis also lacked basis, as no traces of altercation or signs of strangers were found in the warehouse vicinity. The possibility that Thomas left voluntarily or deliberately concealed his route continued to be ruled out due to no supporting data from finances, communications, or personal items. At the conclusion of the second search, the team assessed that the search scope had been appropriately narrowed and some unrealistic possibilities eliminated, but they also had to acknowledge that no physical evidence emerged to advance the investigation further. The absence of traces at key points indicated that Thomas's disappearance left no easily recognizable signs in areas he frequented, forcing the team to shift from field searches to analyzing other elements in the case file to explain the extended hazy period between leaving home and the vehicle's recording at Logan. When the second search concluded without any breakthrough, the investigative team was compelled to compile all information gathered from the initial weeks of handling Thomas Avery's missing person case to evaluate whether to continue operations or acknowledge the case had reached an impasse. Reports from Somerville Police, Chelsea Police, and field search teams were consolidated into an estimated 200-plus page file, including statements, site inspection logs, communication data, lists of searched areas, and eliminated hypotheses. During compilation, the team noted that the most critical time markers, including departure time, travel route, and the victim's location during the nearly 2 hours before the vehicle entered the Logan lot, remained completely without verification data. Similarly, areas potentially containing physical evidence, despite repeated checks, yielded no relevant signs. This left the entire investigation revolving around unsubstantiated assumptions, creating a picture lacking cohesion and preventing clear conclusions. Upon re-examining each information source in detail, the team also realized that most data collected in the early days relied on subjective statements from involved parties rather than physical evidence or device recordings. The absence of traffic cameras, mobile location data, vehicle tracking sensors, and comprehensive area security systems meant reconstructing the victim's movement pattern relied almost entirely on witness memory and honesty. This was one of the greatest limitations of technology and investigative procedure in 2004: low public surveillance coverage, minimal digital information, and insufficient independent data sources to verify or refute statements. Even the cameras at Logan Airport, expected to be the sole key data source in the victim's journey, failed to show Thomas exiting the vehicle or entering the terminal, partly due to low camera quality at the time, and partly due to angles not covering the entire garage area. These limitations prevented the team from determining whether Thomas drove himself to the lot or someone else delivered the vehicle there. The lack of automated license plate recognition, real-time traffic databases, and phone tracing systems left the hazy period around the airport unexplained, with all related hypotheses remaining at the level of inference. When assessing the risk level of the case, the team concluded that all factors pointed to an unusual disappearance with high risk. Thomas's complete loss of contact, failure to return home, absence from work, and leaving his personal vehicle in the airport lot without evidence of any flight were strong indicators that the case might involve coercion, criminal behavior, or an unpredictable event. However, the elevated risk did not bring any specific evidence to steer the investigation toward a criminal direction. No blood, no signs of struggle, no independent witnesses seeing the victim or vehicle at critical times, and no reports from rescue teams or hospitals about a matching man being brought in for emergency care. This situation placed the team in a deadlock, high risk, but insufficient evidence to expand into a criminal investigation. Meanwhile, field data was inadequate to continue searching for accident or voluntary departure scenarios. In internal meetings in October 2004, after nearly 2 months of continuous investigation without progress, Somerville Police were forced to compile an official case status evaluation. The concluding report stated clearly that primary investigative directions had yielded no new evidence, initial hypotheses had been fully considered and sequentially eliminated. No technical data existed to expand analysis, and no new witnesses had emerged. Meanwhile, the passage of time reduced the likelihood of finding evidence, and further expanding the search scope was no longer effective without a clear directional lead. Based on Somerville Police Department standards for prolonged missing person cases with no traces, Thomas Avery's file was classified for transition to inactive missing person status, reserved for unresolved cases lacking feasible investigative grounds to maintain active operations. Although placing the file in inactive status did not mean the case was completely abandoned, it marked the point at which the team ceased field efforts and maintained only minimal monitoring, awaiting any new information. This decision was made in the context of no remaining signs that continued deployment would yield results, and the technological data shortages of the time created insurmountable limitations. Thus, by the end of 2004, Thomas Avery's missing person file was officially closed and added to the city of Somerville's cold case list, leaving a series of unanswered questions and a large gap in determining what happened during the victim's final observed hours. 15 years after Thomas Avery's missing person file was moved to cold case status, the case was unexpectedly reactivated in March 2019 when a group of workers at a redevelopment construction site in East Boston reported discovering an industrial chest freezer buried halfway under the ground in an area that had once been an old warehouse slated for demolition. Initially, the workers viewed it as leftover scrap from the prior structure, but when they attempted to move the freezer with a forklift, the metal lid bent upward and released an unusual odor. Noticing the smell was abnormal and indicative of organic decomposition, the site manager immediately halted construction and notified the Boston Police Department. When the Rapid Response Unit arrived, they fully opened the lid and discovered human remains inside, wrapped in 2 layers of industrial nylon and tightly bound with thick duct tape. Items inside the freezer indicated an intentional effort to preserve the body in a cold environment before the unit was abandoned or buried during the old warehouse relocation years earlier. Since the freezer had been inoperative for a long time, the body was decomposed but retained several key identifying features, including the jaw structure, facial bones, clothing remnants, and some metal hardware fused with fabric. The forensic unit was mobilized the same day, sealing the freezer and transporting all evidence to the lab for processing under homicide investigation protocols. Initial examination revealed the remains belonged to a middle-aged male, with height consistent with Thomas Avery's description. Although soft tissue was heavily decomposed, dental structures remained sufficiently intact for comparison. The forensic team found fabric traces consistent with business trousers, similar to those Thomas typically wore to work, along with a metal key clip embedded in the nylon layers, closely matching the key holder Lydia Avery had described in the 2004 missing person report. However, the decisive factor was the dental structure. Thomas Avery's dental records were still on file at a Somerville clinic, and preliminary comparison with the remaining jaw showed a high match, sufficient for the forensic odontologist to conclude the remains had a very high probability of being Thomas's. For absolute certainty, bone samples were sent for DNA analysis using reference samples from living relative. DNA results returned 2 weeks later, confirming the body found in the freezer was Thomas Avery, the man who had been missing for over 15 years. With this positive identification, the case was immediately reclassified from missing person inactive to homicide investigation, as the condition of the remains and the deliberate preservation in a freezer clearly indicated intentional concealment and body disposal, ruling out accident or natural causes. Signs of multiple layers of duct tape, industrial nylon, and bindings around the lower limbs proved the body had been handled with intent by someone with knowledge or at least experience in warehouse or transportation environments. Additionally, the freezer's discovery at a site that had transitioned from an old transportation company's warehouse prior to demolition suggested the perpetrator may have exploited the facility relocation years earlier to hide the equipment and body without attracting attention. The discovery of the body in the freezer represented a major turning point in the investigation, as it completely eliminated the possibility that Thomas left voluntarily or met with an undetected accident. Instead, all evidence pointed to a carefully concealed and calculated homicide. This was also why the Boston Police Department promptly transferred the file to the cold case unit, which specializes in analyzing long-term cases and combining old data with modern technology. Upon accepting the file, the cold case unit reviewed all 2004 materials, including Somerville police reports, timeline analysis, multi-round interview statements, searched area lists, images of the vehicle at Logan, and all information related to time discrepancies. The unit re-examined each timeframe to identify which aspects of the old file had not been fully exploited, which could be re-verified using 2019 technology, and which required a new context now that Thomas's homicide was confirmed. Simultaneously, the unit reanalyzed the connection between the freezer discovery location and the 2004 investigative directions to assess whether the site had fallen within the prior search radius but been overlooked, or lay entirely outside the evaluated area at the time. The discovery of the remains not only marked the file's reactivation, but also served as a new starting point for an entirely different investigation from a traceless missing person. Thomas Avery had become the victim of a complex, deliberately concealed homicide, and every previously eliminated hypothesis now had to be reconsidered through the lens of a serious criminal case. After the body of Thomas Avery was identified and the case officially reclassified as a homicide investigation, the cold case unit began reconstructing the entire 2004 timeline by integrating old data with new analytical techniques from 2019 to create a more accurate picture of the victims and related individuals' movements leading up to his disappearance. The first step was to compile all original documents from the Somerville police, including witness statements, crime scene inspection reports, communication records, work logs, and vehicle information from the Logan parking garage. All of this data was digitized and imported into an analysis system to create a standardized timeline model, allowing each time point to be compared against newly accessible independent sources using modern techniques. The cold case unit placed particular focus on the period from 10 p.m. on August 16th to 5:22 a.m. on August 17th, a window identified in the old files as the fuzzy time. However, thanks to 2019 technology, the unit was able to cross-reference data that could not be exploited in 2004, including archived cell tower records, enhanced analysis of blurry footage from old cameras using upscaling algorithms, and extraction of motion patterns from surveillance video at the airport garage. Although Thomas's phone lacked GPS, the cold case unit was still able to extract a map of connections to the nearest cell towers that the device pinged during the night of August 16th. This data showed the device connected to a subsidiary tower on the edge of Somerville around midnight, contradicting Lydia's statement that Thomas had gone to bed early. This was the first anomaly overlooked in the 2004 investigation. In addition, the cold case unit reanalyzed the old Logan parking garage video using modern image processing technology, increasing brightness and contrast frame by frame. Despite the low recording quality, the algorithm revealed a figure exiting the vehicle after it entered the garage, but the gate did not match descriptions associated with Thomas in related documents. This introduced an additional branch into the new timeline model. The driver, who arrived at Logan, was not necessarily Thomas. The unit continued by comparing timelines for each directly involved individual. For Lydia, cross-referencing her statements with cell tower data and late warehouse light timestamps revealed inconsistencies in her account that became new points of suspicion. Kevin Marsh's timeline was also re-examined, particularly the period he claimed he was not at the warehouse late on the evening of August 16th. Warehouse entry-exit logs and shift schedules showed another employee noting that Kevin had inspected the container yard around 11 p.m., close to when the office lights were still on. Although not conclusive, the new timeline model flagged this as elevated risk. The cold case unit also reviewed timelines of other warehouse employees, cross-checking each person's activity that night. An early shift worker questioned in 2004 had said nothing unusual occurred, but when re-interviewed in 2019, The individual recalled hearing a loud engine noise coming from behind the warehouse around 4 a.m. Information absent from the original file because the person deemed it unimportant at the time. This detail was incorporated into the new timeline model as a significant highlight, since the 4 a.m. timing fell within Thomas's fuzzy window and aligned with the vehicle's later appearance at Logan more than an hour afterward. In parallel with timeline reconstruction, the cold case unit built a behavioral model based on the victim's psychosocial data, analyzing which behaviors were most likely during fuzzy periods. The model indicated Thomas had no tendency to leave home abruptly late at night. Therefore, his departure near 4 a.m. could only occur if it was a fixed habit or due to an unforeseen event. The investigation team further incorporated vehicle data into the timeline model. The period from when the car left the driveway until it entered Logan took nearly 2 hours, yet the actual distance required less than 20 minutes. This strongly confirmed the vehicle must have stopped at an intermediate point. Using this data, the new timeline model created a mandatory stop window from 3:50 a.m. to 4:40 a.m. Now considered the investigative focal point because it could not be explained by any reasonable habit of Thomas. The new timeline model revealed a notable coincidence. This mandatory stop window overlapped with the time a warehouse employee heard a loud engine behind the Chelsea industrial area. This raised the possibility that Thomas's vehicle was present in that area during the fuzzy period, a scenario never fully considered in the 2004 investigation due to lack of technical data and inconsistencies in statements. Finally, the cold case unit consolidated all new data into a standardized timeline model, marking 3 major anomalies. First, Thomas's phone was active later than Lydia claimed. Second, the figure exiting the vehicle at Logan did not match descriptions of Thomas. Third, the possibility the vehicle stopped in the Chelsea industrial fringe area coincided with the largest fuzzy time window. When plotted into the new timeline, these 3 points led to a clearer suspicion. Thomas's disappearance did not occur in a random fuzzy window, but was likely connected to the actions of another person in the timeline who approached or interfered with Thomas during the unverifiable period between Somerville and Logan. After the 2019 timeline model revealed numerous anomalies related to timing and behavior that the 2004 investigation could not clarify, the cold case unit moved to the phase of forensic analysis of the body and the industrial freezer, the most important physical evidence in the entire case. The Boston Police Forensic Division conducted the autopsy immediately after DNA confirmed the victim's identity as Thomas Avery, focusing on 3 main elements: estimating time of death, identifying injuries related to the mechanism of death, and evaluating preservation traces on the body to determine methods of transport, storage, and concealment. Although soft tissue had heavily decomposed due to prolonged lack of continuous refrigeration, some deep muscle tissue, bone marrow, and cartilage structures remained sufficient for analysis. First, forensics determined the body had been kept frozen for a significant period immediately after death, before the freezer was abandoned and ceased functioning. This was evident from uneven decomposition. Deeper tissues decomposed more slowly than surface tissues, while joint muscles showed characteristic contraction patterns of early freezing. This was a key indicator that the body had been deliberately handled to slow natural decomposition. Regarding time of death, forensics could not pinpoint an exact moment due to the 15-year interval degrading direct biological markers, but based on the relative decomposition between frozen and unfrozen tissues, they concluded death occurred very close to the 2004 disappearance date, most likely within 24 to 48 hours of when Thomas was last heard leaving home. This aligned with the new timeline model, indicating the victim did not survive long after going missing. Regarding injuries, forensics noted a small fracture in the occipital bone region and damage to the third right rib. Both were fresh fractures occurring while the victim was alive or immediately pre-mortem. Though not directly fatal, They suggested Thomas experienced significant physical force, possibly being pushed down, struck against a hard surface, or restrained during coercion. No incised or stab wounds were found on bone, ruling out sharp weapons. However, bruising patterns in deep muscle tissue indicated a struggle or altercation had taken place. The forensic division continued by analyzing the industrial freezer, a piece of evidence containing substantial information about body handling and concealment. Results showed the freezer belonged to a common product line used in warehouses and transport facilities in the Boston area in the early 2000s. The serial number on the circuit board had been deliberately abraded, but a partial obscured identifier remained on the steel frame under rust. Using infrared imaging and contrast enhancement, the code was partially recovered and cross-checked against archived records from 3 industrial equipment distributors in Massachusetts. The cold case unit determined this model had been sold to a cold storage facility in Chelsea in 2002, located less than half a mile from the Avery logistics warehouse. This was a significant lead, as the freezer's origin aligned temporally with Thomas's disappearance and was directly tied to the victim's work area. Beyond confirming the freezer's origin, forensics analyzed interior materials such as fabric fibers, soil, metal dust, adhesive residues, and nylon wrapping used to encase the body. Fibers from the nylon layer matched materials used in industrial packaging at Chelsea container yards in the early 2000s. Soil samples from the freezer bottom contained mineral profiles consistent with ground in the industrial area behind the old warehouse row near Chelsea Creek, an area superficially searched during the second sweep, but missed at the time because the freezer had been buried under construction fill. More critically, in the metal crevices of the freezer, forensics discovered a layer of pale navy blue paint dust, matching the paint color used on the rear door of Avery Logistics in 2003 per surviving internal renovation records. This marked the first physical trace directly linking the freezer to an environment associated with the victim. The forensic division also analyzed the duct tape wrapping the body. This tape was a type commonly used for pallet wrapping in transport companies, 6 inches wide, with a distinctive acrylic adhesive composition. When compared to archived supplies from Avery Logistics, the cold case unit noted significant similarity between the adhesive on the body and tape stock delivered to the company warehouse in early 2004. While not conclusive proof the freezer or tape came from Avery Logistics, it supported that the person handling the body had access to or familiarity with industrial supplies in the Chelsea area. Additionally, fiber analysis from the nylon layer revealed small fibers from the type of work coveralls worn by warehouse employees during that period. Not sufficient for individual identification, but enough to link the freezer to a warehouse or transport shop environment. When synthesizing all results, forensics concluded the freezer most likely originated from an industrial facility within the Chelsea Industrial District between 2000 and 2004, consistent with the timing of Thomas's disappearance. Its discovery buried under the floor of a former warehouse being demolished further supported it, having come from a facility that was transferred or cleared after 2004. Forensic findings cross-referenced with the timeline model allowed the cold case unit to determine that body packaging, preservation, and transport occurred very shortly after death. This could only have been carried out by someone knowledgeable about warehousing, refrigeration equipment, and heavy object movement. The choice of a freezer as concealment method indicated the perpetrator's intent to delay decomposition and extend the window of non-detection. Overall, the forensic results not only clarified how the body was preserved, but also significantly narrowed the operational environment of the involved party, setting the stage for the cold case unit to conduct deeper comparative analysis of traces against individuals present in the timeline, especially those with access to the Chelsea industrial area at the time of Thomas Avery's disappearance. After forensic results from the body and freezer provided substantial links between physical evidence and the Chelsea warehouse environment, the cold case unit shifted focus to reanalyzing all 2004 Logan Airport imagery using AI enhancement technology to most accurately reconstruct the movements of the person who brought Thomas Avery's vehicle into the parking garage. Videos from the Terminal B garage were originally very low quality, noisy images, poor resolution, unstable lighting, and limited angles, preventing 2004 investigators from confirming whether the driver was Thomas himself. However, with 2019 image enhancement technology, each frame was digitized and processed using denoising algorithms, lighting adjustment, and deep learning sharpening models, recovering details previously entirely obscured. After reconstructing the video sequence, the cold case unit obtained clearer images of the figure stepping out of the vehicle, though the face remained unusable for direct identification due to the non-frontal camera angle. Nevertheless, gait, stride length, shoulder tilt, motion cadence, and foot placement spacing were sufficient for motion-based identification analysis, a technique virtually non-existent in civilian investigations in 2004, but widely used by 2019 for identifying individuals through body movement. The cold case unit extracted 3 consecutive motion segments of the person exiting the vehicle, walking past the camera, closing the door, and hand movement while holding a small object on the right. Geometric parameters of each motion were fed into a comparison system against gait reference data collected from relevant individuals. To increase accuracy, the unit requested motion samples from those appearing in the old timeline, Lydia Avery, Kevin Marsh, and several warehouse employees who worked the evening shift on August 16. These samples were captured via high-resolution cameras in 3 views, frontal, side, and overhead, enabling the AI model to match micro-motion features such as hip rotation, stride width, ankle deviation under load, and weight transfer patterns. Results showed the gait of the person leaving the vehicle at Logan did not match the motion model of Thomas Avery, reconstructed from everyday family-provided videos in which Thomas walked slowly, with a slight forward lean and arms held in a fixed position. In contrast, the person in the video walked quickly, with lower center of gravity, wider strides, and left shoulder slightly forward, a feature absent in Thomas's model. The cold case unit expanded comparisons to other relevant individuals. Results indicated the video gait showed higher similarity to the motion sample of one of the warehouse employees, an individual who drew no attention in the 2004 investigation because their statement was consistent and work schedule did not overlap with the disappearance time. However, motion identification analysis showed the video subject's height, shoulder posture, and stride cadence had over 70% similarity to this individual's reference sample, higher than all others. Alongside gait analysis, the cold case unit combined reconstructed cell tower positioning data. Although Thomas did not carry a smartphone, passive ping maps from 2004 were partially recovered thanks to carrier archival systems. While Thomas's device last pinged a Somerville tower around midnight, another mobile device, belonging to the individual showing high gait similarity, had a record of pings near the Logan area around 5 a.m. on August 17. This had never been examined in the old file because 2004 protocols did not require collecting tower maps for anyone except the victim. Cross-referencing this with the new timeline model showed the suspect was present in the Logan vicinity at a time matching the recorded entry of Thomas's vehicle into the garage. A coincidence significant enough to elevate this individual to priority investigative focus. The cold case unit further enhanced AI analysis by resimulating the video subject's motion at triple resolution to examine the object held in the right hand. Results suggested it was a metal keyring or clip of small to medium weight. Compared to descriptions of Thomas's usual keyring, round and somewhat bulky, the object in the video was longer and slimmer, consistent with a carabiner style commonly used by warehouse employees to hang access cards. This reinforced the conclusion that the person exiting the vehicle was not Thomas, but someone familiar with warehouse environments. For additional verification, the cold case unit applied stride length to height correlation algorithms. Although the camera did not capture the full body, the model estimated height based on frame spacing and camera angle. Results indicated the video subject's height ranged from 5'10" inches to 6'0", while Thomas was 5'8". Cross-checking against 2004 Avery Logistics personnel records, only 3 individuals fell in the corresponding height range, and among them only one had an unverifiable schedule overlapping the fuzzy time window identified by the timeline model. The convergence of gait analysis, mobile positioning, and AI-enhanced imaging pointed to the same conclusion: the person who drove the vehicle to the Logan garage was not Thomas Avery, but a specific individual with direct ties to the Chelsea warehouse environment. This marked a major breakthrough in the cold case investigation, as for the first time in 15 years, a potential suspect emerged not from statements, but from the integration of modern technology, with re-established fuzzy timelines, using behavioral analysis and digital forensic techniques. After completing the video analysis using AI enhancement technology and determining that the figure leaving the vehicle at Logan was not Thomas Avery, but matched significantly with an individual who appeared in the 2004 case file, the cold case unit moved to the step of synthesizing all forensic evidence, the new timeline data, and the old statement system to evaluate the role, degree of involvement, and behavior of each individual within the scope of the case. This comparison process was conducted by dividing the evidence into three groups: the physical forensics group related to the body and the freezer, the behavioral group, based on statements, schedules, and time markers, and the technical group, including phone data, Logan video, and motion analysis. From the forensics group, forensic experts confirmed that the freezer originated from an industrial area near the warehouse in Chelsea and contained traces of nylon duct tape, fabric fibers, and paint dust matching the work environment of many Avery Logistics employees, including some materials similar to the types of goods the company warehoused in 2003-2004. This indicates that the person handling the body had knowledge of the industrial supplies at the warehouse and likely had access to the freezer in a time frame close to the date Thomas went missing. When cross-referencing this data with the old timeline, the cold case unit identified a key factor in the appearance of a warehouse employee. A person whose schedule overlapped with the ambiguous time window identified in the new timeline model, and who was the only one among the relevant figures whose motion attributes closely matched those of the person leaving the vehicle at Logan. Regarding Lydia Avery, re-examination of her statement revealed several inconsistencies with the new timeline data, particularly her confirmation that Thomas had gone to bed early while his phone pinged a tower near Somerville later than that time. However, the inconsistencies in Lydia's statement were primarily assessed as memory errors or due to her not directly observing Thomas's activities on the night of August 16th, rather than signs of concealment or criminal involvement. Forensics found no link between Lydia and the freezer, physical evidence, or traces at the warehouse, so she was classified in the indirectly related group with a low level of suspicion. For Kevin Marsh, the new timeline showed that his initial statement about not being at the warehouse on the night of August 16th contained several mismatches with information from the night shift employee, who confirmed seeing Kevin in the warehouse area near the end of the shift. Forensics from the freezer also revealed a quantity of paint dust matching the type of paint used at the warehouse in 2003, when Kevin held the role of construction observer during warehouse repairs. Although these points were not sufficient to prove direct involvement by Kevin, they made him a subject requiring deeper analysis. However, gait analysis indicated that Kevin's walking pattern was completely inconsistent with the movement of the person appearing in the Logan video, and Kevin's phone data showed no pings near Logan on the morning of August 17th, significantly reducing the likelihood that he was the driver. Continuing the cross-referencing, the cold case unit compared statements from other warehouse employees, particularly the one who heard a loud engine noise behind the warehouse around 4 a.m. This time coincided with the important ambiguous window in the timeline, and when combined with the movement model from Somerville to Chelsea and then to Logan, the cold case unit recognized this as a reasonable intersection point among the event chain. Among this group of employees, only one individual, the same person whose motion analysis showed high similarity to the Logan video, possessed all three notable factors: matching height, matching gait, and geographic location, aligning with the phone ping near Logan. This person's 2004 statement raised no suspicion because he provided simple information that he left the warehouse at the end of his shift and went straight home. However, 2019 data showing his phone pinging in the Logan area made the old statement contradictory. The cold case unit also cross-referenced other forensic elements, including fibers in the nylon wrapping the body, some of which had characteristics matching the type of work coveralls used by warehouse staff at the time of Thomas's disappearance. Upon rechecking labor equipment records, the unit determined that the individual with the matching gait was responsible for unloading shipments using similar nylon bags in the month prior to the disappearance. These factors, combined with the freezer originating from the industrial area near the warehouse, further reinforce this individual's connection to the physical environment of the case. Phone data was the next element cross-referenced. In 2019, cell towers recorded the suspect's device pinging in the Logan area exactly when Thomas's vehicle entered the parking lot. When combined with the simulated timeline, the cold case unit matched the behavior. The vehicle left the Chelsea industrial area during the ambiguous time window, traveled to Logan, and was parked by someone other than Thomas. This data completely refuted the 2004 statement that the suspect went straight home after his shift, and ruled out coincidence because there was no reasonable explanation for him to be at Logan at that time. When synthesizing all evidence, forensics, new timeline, phone data, motion analysis, and statement cross-referencing, the cold case unit classified the involved subjects into two groups. The first group, indirectly related, included Lydia and warehouse employees with no major timeline conflicts, no physical traces linked, and no presence in suspicious tower pings. The second group, direct suspect, narrowed to one individual present in the matching timeline, with similar gait, indirect physical evidence linked to the freezer, and phone data placing him at the exact place and time the victim's vehicle was brought to Logan. This grouping created an important foundation for the next investigative step, as the cold case unit began focusing all resources on deeper analysis of the direct suspect's connections to physical, behavioral, and contextual evidence related to Thomas Avery's disappearance. Once the cold case unit had narrowed down the direct suspect based on the synthesis of forensics, timeline, and technical data, the next step was to subject the suspect to an advanced interrogation process in the form of full data confrontation, compelling this person to explain each irrefutable inconsistency. The suspect, a warehouse employee who had received little attention in the 2004 investigation, was invited to Boston Police Headquarters under the pretext of assisting with additional information. However, the interrogation was meticulously prepared. On the table were placed full printouts of the AI-enhanced Logan video, gait analysis results, phone ping data, plausible movement maps based on the new timeline model, freezer photographs, forensic reports, and excerpts from the statement he provided in 2004. The goal was to create an inescapable confrontation environment, forcing the suspect to face the reality that every inconsistency could be traced back to his actions. The interrogation began by asking him to restate the timeline for the night of August 16th and early morning of August 17th. The same question asked in 2004, but this time, investigators interjected with targeted questions to test the alignment between the old statement and new data. From the very first minutes, the suspect's answers showed hesitation as he tried to describe leaving the warehouse right at the end of his shift, but when asked for a specific time, he repeated inaccurate figures compared to internal records. Next, investigators confronted his old statement with information recalled in 2019 by an early shift employee from 2004 that a loud engine noise was heard behind the warehouse exactly during the ambiguous 4 a.m. window. When asked if he had heard anything unusual during that time, the suspect evaded and said it was probably a truck from the neighboring warehouse. However, investigators immediately placed a detailed map of the warehouse area in front of him, proving that at that time no vehicles from other businesses were logged in the industrial park's entry-exit system, instantly making his answer the first point of collapse. Next, investigators presented the gait analysis results. Although this technique cannot prove individual identity with absolute certainty, the level of similarity between the suspect's gait and that of the person leaving the vehicle at Logan was too clear to deny. When the images were displayed on the screen, the suspect appeared more tense, hands clasped together, eyes avoiding the screen. Investigators emphasized that the motion analysis model showed particularly clear matches in the left shoulder tilt and stride frequency, characteristics he could not deny when visually compared. This was the second point of collapse, as his initial 2004 statement asserted he had never been to Logan that morning. Subsequently, investigators introduced the phone ping data, a technical element the suspect could not have anticipated. When he saw the printed chart showing his device connecting to a tower east of Logan Airport around 5 a.m. on August 17th, his expression changed immediately. The suspect tried to explain that someone else could have had the phone, but investigators promptly pointed out that during the same period, Logan cameras captured a figure with height, shoulder posture, and stride matching him, leaving the victim's vehicle. This was the third point of collapse. His 2004 claim of leaving the warehouse and going straight home was completely shattered by real evidence. The interrogation moved to the most critical part, forensic confrontation. Investigators placed an evidence bag in front of the suspect, navy blue paint sample from the freezer, industrial nylon fibers, and duct tape sample found on the body. He was then asked to explain why all three elements matched warehouse supplies he was responsible for in 2003. 2004. The suspect began sweating, and his responses became disjointed. Investigators continued with a key fact. The freezer found at the East Boston construction site had a recovered hidden serial number that partially matched a shipment transferred from a facility near Avery Logistics Warehouse in 2002. This was evidence showing the freezer's direct origin from the suspect's work environment. When asked if he remembered handling or coming into contact with this equipment, the suspect could not provide a convincing answer. This was the fourth point of collapse. After nearly 2 hours of continuous confrontation, with all data, images, and technical evidence placed directly in front of him, the suspect began showing signs of psychological breakdown. Investigators maintained pressure by reading back each segment of his 2004 statement, pointing out every discrepancy, and concluding with a direct question: do you want to explain why all the data shows you were the one who brought the vehicle to Logan? At this point, the suspect's voice began to tremble, his speech halting. After several minutes of prolonged silence, he admitted that he had been with Thomas in the early morning of August 17th in the area behind the warehouse. Initially, he described it as an argument about a delayed shipment, but investigators demanded he clarify the actions leading to the body being placed in the freezer. Under the pressure of forensic evidence, the suspect confessed that a scuffle occurred, and Thomas fell and hit his head on the edge of a container, then became unconscious. Although this statement attempted to minimize responsibility, forensics on the occipital bone injuries showed this was not a simple fall but a forceful impact, and investigators gave him no opportunity to evade. When asked why he did not call for emergency help, the suspect was silent for a moment, then admitted he panicked because he believed Thomas was dead and wanted to cover it up to avoid losing his job. From there, he described the process of wrapping the body in industrial nylon, taping it, and using the freezer to slow decomposition. He admitted to moving the freezer into an empty warehouse area alone and using Thomas's vehicle as a diversion. When asked about motive, the suspect continued to claim it was an unintentional accident, but the prolonged chain of concealment actions he described, including moving the freezer, choosing an off-hours time, removing the serial number, and taking the vehicle to Logan to mislead investigators, were sufficient to establish criminal responsibility far beyond ordinary manslaughter. Investigators noted clearly in the record that the concealment process, body handling, and vehicle manipulation for diversion were intentional acts, not merely immediate panic responses. With this confession, the cold case unit completed the step of identifying the direct suspect and the elements constituting the crime, paving the way for prosecution under the most serious provisions related to causing death and concealing a crime. Immediately after the direct suspect confessed to the sequence of actions related to Thomas Avery's death, Boston police coordinated with the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office to evaluate the entire confession, cross-reference it with forensic evidence, timeline data, and technical information to make the decision to prosecute. This process required examining each element of the crime under Massachusetts law to accurately determine the appropriate charges matching the nature of the conduct. Based on the suspect's confession and the collected evidence, the District Attorney's Office identified at least 3 serious criminal acts, one causing the victim's death in circumstances that could not be considered a simple accident, evidenced by occipital bone trauma, and proof that the victim suffered forceful impact immediately before death. 2. Intentionally handling the body by wrapping it in nylon, taping it, and placing it in a freezer to delay decomposition. 3. Concealing the crime through moving the body, erasing traces, burying the freezer, and taking the victim's vehicle to Logan Airport to mislead investigators. These 3 acts constituted offenses under Massachusetts law, including involuntary manslaughter or second-degree murder, depending on the assessment of intent level, along with abuse of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. After analyzing motive factors, post-death actions, and the extent of prolonged concealment, the district attorney decided to prosecute the suspect for second-degree murder, as the use of force resulting in death and the effort to conceal demonstrated clear awareness of serious consequences, exceeding the framework of an accident. In addition, 3 lesser charges, abuse of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering, were included in the file to fully reflect the severity of the body handling and concealment. Once the prosecution decision was signed, Boston police executed the arrest of the suspect pursuant to a court warrant, ensuring the entire arrest process complied with procedural requirements, reading Miranda rights, recording the arrestee's responses, preparing an inventory and sealing of personal property, and transferring the suspect to the Suffolk County lockup. While awaiting the first hearing, the cold case unit collaborated with the district attorney's office to build the prosecution file, including all photographic materials, statements, forensic reports, and technical analyses related to the case. Core components of the file included autopsy report, freezer analysis, paint, soil, fiber, and tape data, AI reconstructed Logan video, gate analysis results, reconstructed phone ping data, new timeline model, and the suspect's confession transcript. Each category was presented with technical explanations to ensure the grand jury could clearly understand the legal value of each piece of evidence. In parallel with building the physical evidence file, the district attorney's office identified the key witnesses to be summoned at the grand jury hearing. Among these, the most important witnesses included the forensic pathologist responsible for Thomas Avery's autopsy, who could explain the injuries and degree of decomposition, the materials analysis expert, who could prove the similarity between paint, nylon, tape samples, and Chelsea warehouse supplies, the video and AI enhancement expert, who could confirm the image enhancement process and the reason for ruling out Thomas as the driver, the gait analysis expert, who could present the motion similarity level between the suspect and the figure in the video, carrier representative providing the phone ping map, the cold case unit investigator who synthesized all evidence, and the warehouse employee who heard the loud engine noise in the early morning of August 17th, helping solidify the new timeline. Additionally, some secondary witnesses, such as the construction site manager who discovered the freezer and the serial number recovery expert, were also included to prove the freezer's origin and the concealment mechanism. The district attorney's office also prepared to counter potential defense strategies the suspect might employ. Anticipating arguments such as unintentional accident, no intent to kill, or concealment due to panic, the prosecution established rebuttals based on injury severity inconsistent with the fell and hit head-on container claim, the concealment sequence requiring time and calculation, taking the vehicle to Logan to mislead investigators, and evidence showing the freezer was prepared solely to preserve the body. At the same time, the complete prosecution file had to demonstrate tight linkage among the three evidence groups, physical, behavioral, and technical, to prove that the suspect's confession was not only the primary basis, but also the inevitable result of confrontation with the objective data system. After the entire file was digitized, the district attorney submitted the official prosecution submission to Suffolk County Court, requesting the opening of grand jury proceedings and approval of witness summonses, additional data extraction orders, and remaining evidence sealing orders. At this point, the Thomas Avery case officially moved from the investigation phase to the prosecution phase, with all evidence organized into a complete legal structure, ready to be presented in court. The Suffolk County Superior Court trial in the Thomas Avery case opened with particular attention as the justice system for the first time presented a 15-year-long case in full chronological legal detail. The prosecution began with an overview of the case, describing the victim's disappearance in 2004, the initial investigation efforts, the case going cold, and the breakthrough in 2019 when the body was discovered in an industrial chest freezer at the East Boston construction site. Next, the prosecution detailed the defendant's actions that caused Thomas's death, including the context of the altercation, the force of impact leading to fatal injuries, and the extended sequence of concealment actions over many hours, demonstrating clear awareness of the grave consequences. To bolster their argument, the prosecution presented all forensic evidence from the freezer, analysis of nylon traces, duct tape, fabric fibers, soil, and paint dust matching industrial supplies at the Chelsea warehouse, the fractured occipital bone and rib structures proving heavy blunt force impact, and evidence of deliberate cold preservation of the body. The prosecution then introduced modern technological analyses into evidence, AI-enhanced Logan Airport video clearly showing the person exiting the vehicle was not Thomas. Gait analysis reconstruction confirming a high degree of similarity to the defendant. Cell phone ping data reconstructing the defendant's presence at Logan Airport precisely when the victim's vehicle was parked there, along with a new timeline model establishing the defendant as the only individual present in the critical time window where the incident occurred. In rebuttal, the defense attempted to focus on the argument that Thomas's death was an unintentional accident during an argument, that the defendant had no intent to kill, and that the entire concealment sequence stemmed from fear of losing his job. The defense also challenged the accuracy of the gait analysis and the quality of the old video, arguing that reliance on modern reconstruction technology could introduce bias. However, the prosecution countered that the accident claim was inconsistent with the forensic data, as the occipital injury and degree of struggle indicated violent conduct. Moreover, if it had truly been an accident, the defendant had the reasonable option of calling for emergency help instead of carrying out a calculated series of actions to hide the body. The prosecution emphasized that driving the vehicle to Logan to create the illusion that the victim had left the state constituted clear evidence of concealment that could not be excused as an immediate panic response. In court, a forensic pathologist was called as the key witness to explain the injury mechanism and the abnormal decomposition pattern due to cold storage. A materials expert presented the fiber, soil, and tape analysis process, proving the freezer's origin and linking it to the Chelsea warehouse. AI and gait analysis experts each presented their technical methodologies, stressing that the enhanced video only clarified existing data without generating new imagery, while the motion recognition relied on high-accuracy biomechanical simulation algorithms identifying the defendant as the closest match across the entire comparison sample. The cold case unit investigator outlined the timeline reconstruction process, explaining how the three data streams, forensics, timeline, and technology, converged on the same individual. During his own testimony, the defendant continued to insist that Thomas's death was an accident, but when the prosecution replayed portions of his recorded confession and pointed out internal contradictions between his description of events and the technical injury evidence, the defendant's argument quickly lost credibility. The jury was instructed to consider the criteria for second-degree murder, which includes causing death without premeditated intent, but with a depraved indifference to human life or clear awareness of the substantial risk of causing death. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict finding the defendant guilty of second-degree murder, along with 3 lesser charges: abuse of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. The judge read the sentence in open court, noting that the organized concealment sequence, particularly using the freezer to preserve the body, burying equipment in the industrial area, and moving the vehicle to Logan to mislead the investigation, demonstrated a high level of danger to society. Ultimately, the court imposed a sentence of 25 years to life for the second-degree murder charge, with consecutive sentences for the 3 additional offenses, ensuring the defendant was held fully accountable for the entire course of conduct in the case. With the verdict pronounced, the Thomas Avery case file was officially closed, marking the resolution of one of Massachusetts's longest and most complex missing persons investigations, spanning 15 years from the day the victim vanished until the truth was finally brought to light. In the Thomas Avery case, what forced many Americans to reflect was not only the complexity of a 15-year investigation, but also how seemingly trivial details, a discarded chest freezer, faint cell phone pings, or a fleeting gait in low-quality video, ultimately became the keys to unlocking the truth. In today's United States, where technology advances rapidly and society relies heavily on digital data, the story demonstrates that every action leaves a trace and every hidden truth can be recovered when enough pieces are connected. The fact that police in 2004 could not progress further was not due to lack of effort, but because of technological limitations at the time, a reminder that our current knowledge may not yet be sufficient to solve every problem, yet persistence and adaptation to progress always create opportunities to find answers. A particularly important lesson is the role of the community and data in protecting individual safety. A seemingly innocuous statement from a warehouse worker about hearing noises at 4 a.m. or a construction site manager noticing an odd smell in the freezer became crucial puzzle pieces that helped crack the case. This reminds every American that if you notice something unusual, report it to authorities, because it is precisely community observation that forms the foundation for an effective justice system. Finally, the story shows that in a vast and busy society like the United States, we should never underestimate the importance of transparency in work, relationships, and personal communication. If Thomas had not been working alone so late, if warehouse procedures had been better supervised, if the disappearance had been verified more quickly, the case might not have dragged on so long. The takeaway is clear. Build safe work environments, respect procedures, and always stay connected with loved ones, because sometimes those small things can save a life. If you're interested in more stories of patient detective work and truths revealed after many years, like the Thomas Avery case, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video with more stories that still make America think.